In the suffocating stillness of a Mississippi back road, darkness is never empty. It is occupied. Officer Marcus Steele believed his badge was a license, not just to enforce the law but to rewrite it. For 11 years, he had used Calhoun County's roads as his personal hunting ground, manufacturing guilt out of thin air and burying innocent men beneath paperwork no public defender could climb out of. He had done it to drifters. He had done it to travelers. He had done it to men who simply had the wrong plates and the wrong complexion on the wrong night. He was good at it. He had never once been questioned. But on a thick Wednesday night in late August, Officer Marcus Steele made an error so catastrophic that it would not simply end his career, it would detonate it. He looked at a black Tahoe idling on the shoulder, saw 3 black men in civilian clothes, and decided they were prey. He didn't know he had just initiated the worst decision of his life. He didn't know that the stillness coming off those 3 men wasn't submission. It was training, and he had absolutely no way of knowing that the force moving toward him wore Admiral stars on its collar and carried federal authority in its briefcase. When the courtroom doors eventually swung open, it wouldn't be a lawyer walking through them. It would be a demolition. The heat in Calhoun County in August was a physical thing, wet, pressing, personal. It stuck to your collar and sat behind your eyes. It was 10:22 p.m. on a Wednesday, and Route 7 was a strip of cracked asphalt, hemmed in on both sides by kudzu-choked tree lines that made the road feel like a tunnel with no exits. For Officer Marcus Steele, this was the hour he lived for. Steele had nosed his cruiser into the gap behind an overgrown road sign advertising a tire shop that had burned down 3 summers ago. He cut his headlights. He became part of the dark. He wrapped both hands around a thermos of black coffee, tapped the radar gun against his knee, and waited with the patience of a man who had done this enough times to know that the road always delivered. Steele was not complicated. He liked his authority unchallenged, his arrests uncontested, and his paperwork finished before midnight. He did not think of himself as corrupt. He thought of himself as efficient. In his mind, he was the membrane between Calhoun County and everything that threatened it, and he had his own private definition of threat. Out-of-state plates qualified. Large vehicles with tinted glass qualified. Men who didn't flinch when he approached qualified. He had a feel for it, he told himself. 11 years on this road had given him a feel. A pair of high beams materialized in the distance, bright, wide, expensive. Steele straightened up. The radar gun chirped. 63 in a 55. He allowed himself a small, tight smile. In Calhoun County, 8 miles over was all the key he needed to open any door. The vehicle passed. A black Chevrolet Tahoe, Virginia plates, windows tinted to the legal limit. Steele squinted. 3 silhouettes, he could just make them out through the rear glass. He gave it 2 seconds, then flicked the switch. The strobes exploded into the dark, blue and red carving apart the night, and Steele punched the accelerator, gravel cracking beneath his tires as he swung out onto Route 7. Inside the Tahoe, the atmosphere was operating at a different frequency entirely. "We've got lights," Richard J. Brown said from the back seat, his voice flat and even, the same tone he used in debrief. James Scott, hands already at 10 and 2, eyes already in the rear view, had seen the cruiser pull out before the strobes even activated. "I clocked the gap behind the sign 2 miles back," he said. He was already easing toward the shoulder. 8 over. He was waiting. "Calhoun County," Joshua Johnson said from the passenger seat, not looking up from the map on his phone. He said the name the way you'd identify a weather pattern, informative without alarm. "We've got about 40 miles of this jurisdiction left." "Not anymore," Scott said. He brought the Tahoe to a full stop on the gravel shoulder, and before the cruiser's door had opened, he had already rolled down all 4 windows, activated the dome light, and placed both hands flat and visible on top of the steering wheel. It was muscle memory, the kind built not from fear, but from the particular calculus that black men who move through rural America at night learn to perform automatically, like breathing, like scanning for exits. "Hands visible," Scott said quietly. "Nobody volunteers anything. Let him run his play." Johnson set his phone face down on his thigh. Brown clasped his hands in his lap. The three of them waited in the dome-lit cab with the composed stillness of men who had held position in worse places than this. Steele climbed out of his cruiser slowly, adjusting his belt, rolling his neck once. He let the spotlight do its work, a white column of accusation flooding the Tahoe's interior. He walked with the unhurried certainty of a man who had already decided how this would end. He came to the passenger side first, dropping the beam of his maglite directly into Joshua Johnson's face. "Evening," Steele said. The word was not a greeting. It was an assessment. "Good evening, officer." Johnson didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't reach for his sunglasses. He held the light's glare the same way he'd held worse things. Steele panned the light across the interior. He registered the cleanliness of it first. No cups, no wrappers, no clutter. Then the three men themselves. Large. Composed. A tactical watch on Johnson's wrist caught the beam and threw it back. He moved the light to the driver. "License and registration," he said, crossing to Scott's window. "Of course, officer." Scott's voice was measured, warm, and totally controlled. The voice of a man who had talked down situations in languages Steele had never heard. "Registration is in the glove box. I'll retrieve it slowly." "Do it slow," Steele said. Scott handed both documents over without a word. Standard South Carolina driver's license. He kept his military ID in his wallet. Standard protocol, keep the profile low unless it became necessary. Steele studied the license, then studied Scott, then looked at the other two men. The absence of nervousness was starting to irritate him at a molecular level. His stops usually produced some gradient of fear. Sweating, stammering, over-explaining. These three sat in the dome light like stone, like they were waiting for a bus they knew was already scheduled. "Step out of the vehicle," Steele said. Scott's eyebrows held perfectly still. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I smell marijuana." The lie was effortless and instantaneous. Steele had used it 14 times this calendar year. It was a master key. It bypassed every constitutional lock the Fourth Amendment had installed. The three men exchanged a look so fast it was invisible to Steele. A single, shared microsecond of recognition. There it is. They were all tested monthly. None of them had touched anything in their lives. They knew exactly what this was, what this had always been, what this road always became after dark for men who looked like them. "There are no narcotics in this vehicle, officer," Brown said from the back seat, his voice quieter than either of the others but somehow carrying more weight. "I said step out," Steele said, louder now, the volume a tool. "All three of you. Hands on the hood. Now." Scott exhaled through his nose. "Do as he says," he said to the others. "Not a question. Command. Let him dig." They stepped out, and the moment they were standing in the road beside Steele, the geometry of the scene shifted. James Scott was 6'2", 190 pounds of coiled, functional muscle. Joshua Johnson had 2 inches and 15 pounds on him. Richard J. Brown, the youngest of the three, stood 6'3" with the build of a man who had spent 4 years carrying equipment through mountain passes in conditions Steele could not imagine. Standing next to the three of them, Steele looked like he was wearing a costume. That size differential did not produce respect. Produced fear, and Steele's fear always translated immediately into aggression. He patted them down hard, rough, searching for anything. He found nothing on any of them. 3 wallets, 3 phones, a set of car keys. He stepped back, hand drifting to his holster. "I'm searching the vehicle," he announced. "We do not consent to a search," Scott said clearly. Steele's jaw worked. He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "You don't consent. You a lawyer now? I have probable cause. Stand right there and don't breathe wrong." He climbed into the Tahoe and tore through it. Glove box, floor mats, seat pockets, center console. He came up empty on every pass. The frustration was building behind his eyes like pressure. He couldn't walk away from this. Walking away meant 3 men in a Virginia-plated Tahoe had told him no, and that couldn't happen. Not on Route 7. Not in his county. His hand moved to the inside pocket of his vest. The small sealed baggie had been there since Tuesday morning. He thought of it as insurance, a hedge against situations exactly like this one, when the road gave you the right kind of target but the evidence refused to cooperate. He leaned into the back seat, positioning his body to block the angle of the dash camera, and pressed the baggie deep into the gap between the rear seat cushions. He emerged with it held high in the spotlight's beam, his face arranged into an expression of theatrical discovery. "Well now," Steele said, "look at that." He turned the baggie so the light moved through it. "White powder. Felony. Is no drugs, you said." He shook his head with mock sorrow, walking back toward the 3 men on the shoulder. "Somebody's lying." James Scott looked at the baggie. He identified the seal on it, the twist-tie closure, the particular way it had been folded. His heart rate did not spike. His body went into the mode it had been trained for: collect information, make no irreversible moves, maintain position. "That is not ours," Scott said, his voice dropping a register. "Quiet. Absolute. Officer, you have a body camera. Your cruiser has a dash camera. You know exactly what you just did, and so do we. Stop resisting." Steele moved fast, closing the distance, grabbing Scott's right wrist to force the cuffs on. Scott did not resist. He also did not yield. His arm was what it was, and Steele had to use his full body weight to bend it behind Scott's back. It was like trying to restrain architecture. "James," Brown said from the shoulder. "I'm good," Scott said. "Both of you stay calm. Let him finish." Steele cuffed all 3 men and herded them toward his cruiser, his voice running hot, performing for no audience. "Thought you could move weight through my county. You picked the wrong night and the wrong highway." He shoved Scott into the cage first, then Johnson, then Brown, 3 large men in a space designed for one. The door slammed. Steele walked back to his cruiser to call it in, already composing the narrative in his head. In the cage, Scott pressed the back of his head against the plexiglass divider and stared at the ceiling. The dome light of the cruiser lit Steele's silhouette at the front, shoulders back, grinning into his radio. "He planted it," Johnson said. "I know," Scott said. "We need to call the base," Brown said. "Not yet." Scott's eyes stayed on Steele, watching, calculating, letting the math complete itself. "The command will know we're stationary inside of 3 hours. They'll ping us before we get to booking. When they escalate this, I want every layer of what he just did already on the record. Every move, every lie, every minute of denied counsel." He paused. "Let him dig the hole. Let him dig it all the way down." Brown looked out the window at the dark tree line. "When the Admiral finds out." "He's already going to find out," Scott said. "The question is how deep Steele is when he does." The Calhoun County Processing Facility smelled of industrial cleaner. Cigarette smoke burned into the walls years ago, and the particular staleness of a room where hope had stopped visiting. The fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed and stuttered with a frequency that lodged behind the eyes. Steele walked all 3 men through booking with the energy of a man narrating his own highlight reel, loud talking to the night shift supervisor. A sergeant named Briggs, mid-50s, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, a man who looked like he had long since run out of capacity for surprise. "Route 7 stop," Steele announced, dropping the evidence bag on the counter. 3 of them. Big SUV, Virginia plates, traveling with a felony stash. Open and shut. Sergeant Briggs looked at the 3 men. He was experienced enough to read a room. Most of what came through his booking desk at this hour was slumped, loose, either combative or collapsing. These 3 stood with their feet shoulder-width apart, hands clasped in front of them, chins level. They looked like men waiting for a briefing, not men waiting to be charged. "Names," Briggs said, pulling up the intake form. "James Scott." Scott's voice was even. "Occupation, federal employee." Steele snorted from the corner. "Federal employee. What, you deliver mail? Drive a school bus?" "Something like that," Scott said. "Joshua Johnson," Johnson said. "Same."
Richard J. Brown.
"Same." They emptied their pockets into the gray trays, wallets, phones, keys, loose change. When Scott's wallet landed, the corner of his Department of Defense identification card caught the light at an angle, the gold federal seal briefly illuminating before his wallet folded closed again. Steele grabbed the wallet. He flipped through it and pulled the military ID free, holding it in the fluorescent light with 2 fingers like it was something distasteful. He read it, looked at Scott. "Read it again." "Navy." Steele set the ID down and laughed, the kind of laugh that has no warmth in it. "You're going to stand there and tell me you're in the Navy." "I am," Scott said. Steele slid the ID back across the counter with contempt. "Stolen valor." Carl put it in the charge sheet, impersonating military personnel. "These aren't sailors." He looked at all 3 of them, then at Briggs. "Navy SEALs look like the guys in the movies." "Not." He gestured with his hand. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The cognitive architecture of his bias was doing the work for him, refusing to reconcile the image of 3 composed black men with his narrow mental file of what elite military personnel were supposed to look like. That refusal was the last comfortable thought Officer Marcus Steele would have for a very long time. "We'll need to make a call," Brown said. "Systems are down," Steele said, cutting off Briggs, who had already begun to turn toward the phone mounted on the wall. "You get your call when processing is complete. And processing," he checked his watch theatrically, "is going to take a while tonight." He walked them to the holding cell himself, made a show of the lock, and left without looking back. The door closed. The fluorescent light buzzed above them. Somewhere down the corridor, a drain ran and went silent. James Scott sat on the metal bench, rolled his neck once, and looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man running numbers. At Naval Station Little Creek in Virginia, it was currently 11:47 p.m. In approximately 2 hours and 13 minutes, a GPS transponder check on 3 active-duty Tier 1 operators would return a stationary result from a rural Mississippi county with no explanation attached. A flag would go up. A duty officer would escalate it. And somewhere north of them, a man who had spent 3 decades building the kind of authority that does not ask permission, a man who was known in the quiet language of the fleet as the Admiral, would receive a briefing and set something into motion that Marcus Steele did not have the imagination to see coming. "Get some rest if you can," Scott said to the other 2. "When this door opens again, it's not going to open the same way it closed." The strobes detonated in the rearview mirror without warning, blue and red fracturing the dark, turning Route 7 into something that felt less like a road and more like a verdict. James Scott had already clocked the cruiser 2 miles back, tucked behind the overgrown sign, "Lights dead." The nose of it angled just slightly toward the road in the way predators angle toward movement. He had said nothing then. He said something now. "Hands visible," he murmured, voice low and level, bringing the Tahoe to the shoulder with one smooth deceleration. Don't move unless I say. Let him run the play. Joshua Johnson set his phone face down on his thigh. Richard J. Brown uncrossed his arms and placed both hands flat on his knees. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. The compliance was immediate and total, not because they were afraid. They had operated in places where fear was a liability they could not carry, but because they understood the specific mathematics of this moment. 3 black men. Rural highway. Deep night. There was a drill for this, and unlike most drills, this one had not been designed in a training facility. It had been assembled over years, passed between fathers and sons, learned in the particular grammar of survival that no amount of military service fully replaced. Scott rolled all 4 windows down before the cruiser door had opened. He activated the dome light. He placed both hands on top of the steering wheel, fingers spread, palms pale against the dark leather. Visible. Legible. Nothing left to misread. The 3 of them sat in the soft white light and waited, breathing slow, trained for worse than this, because they always had been. Steele walked the Tahoe the first time with his maglite sweeping low, checking the wheel wells, dragging the beam across the undercarriage the way a man does when he is performing thoroughness rather than practicing it. He found nothing. He already knew he would find nothing. The vehicle was immaculate, not the cleanliness of someone who had hastily cleaned, but the ingrained order of men who lived by a standard. It bothered him more than mess would have. He walked it a second time, slower, pulling the beam through the interior from the outside, letting it settle on the back seat, the cargo area, the gap between the front seats. Still nothing. His jaw tightened with each clean pass until the muscle in his cheek was working visibly, a small, mechanical pulse of frustration. The 3 men stood on the shoulder behind him, not talking, not shifting, not giving him a single thing he could use to escalate. He stopped at the rear passenger door and stood with his back to the dash camera's angle. His right hand moved to the inside pocket of his vest. Not his weapon, the other thing. The small sealed baggie he had been carrying since Tuesday. He didn't deliberate. Deliberation was for men who doubted themselves, and Steele had long ago surgically removed that capacity. He made the decision in 4 seconds, the same way he always made it, cleanly, without ceremony, without remorse. He leaned into the back seat. His hand moved once. The baggie disappeared between the rear cushions. He straightened up, took 1 breath, and walked the vehicle a 3rd time. On the 3rd pass, he stopped, reached in slowly, and emerged holding the baggie above his head in the spotlight's beam like he had always known it would be there. Because in every version of this story that Marcus Steele had ever told, he always had. The booking room at Calhoun County Sheriff's facility was the kind of space that had absorbed decades of misery and stopped noticing. The walls were the yellow of old newspaper. The fluorescent tubes overhead buzzed at a frequency designed, it seemed, to erode patience. Steele walked all 3 men through the door with the energy of a man collecting a debt. The night sergeant, heavy-set, reading glasses, a coffee ring on every visible surface near him, looked up from his desk and read the room the way experienced men do. His eyes moved across the 3 new arrivals and registered something he didn't immediately have language for. They stood too still, too squared. Most of what came through at this hour sagged or seethed. These 3 stood at parade rest like the room was a formation and they were simply waiting for it to begin. When Scott's Department of Defense ID caught the light during the wallet search, Steele snatched it before the sergeant could process what he was looking at. He held it up, read it once, and laughed. A short, evacuated sound with nothing behind it. "Stolen valor," he said, dropping it back into the tray. "Log it, Sergeant." Impersonating military personnel. Their phones went into sealed bags. Brown asked, quietly and without aggression, about making a call. Steele said the system was down and processing would take several hours, a technicality he constructed on the spot and delivered with the fluency of long practice. The cell door closed behind all three of them with a sound like punctuation. They sat in the buzzing quiet. Nobody spoke at length. There was nothing to say that the silence didn't already hold. Scott stared at the ceiling. Johnson closed his eyes. Brown rolled his shoulders once and went still. Everything that needed to be understood had already been understood on the shoulder of Route 7. Now they simply waited because waiting, done correctly, was its own form of precision. At Naval Station Little Creek, the operations center ran on a specific kind of quiet. Not the quiet of inactivity, but the compressed, humming quiet of systems processing information continuously, of screens refreshing, of people trained to notice the things that don't announce themselves. Lieutenant Commander Dana Reeves noticed it at 0147. She had been running a routine transponder check on active personnel with outstanding movement logs, standard protocol for Tier 1 operators on transit clearance. The display showed vehicle positions across 6 states, most of them mobile or parked at expected coordinates. Then she found the 3 signals from Mississippi, all clustered within a quarter mile of each other in Calhoun County, and all of them stationary. She checked the timestamp. They had not moved in 4 hours and 19 minutes. She cross-referenced their expected arrival window. They were due at Little Creek by 0800. 4 hours stationary in a rural county with no check-in, no communication, no deviation request filed. She sat with it for 11 seconds, long enough to rule out the ordinary explanations, and then she picked up the phone. The duty officer took the flag and sat with it for considerably less time than 11 seconds before escalating it up the chain. The next call went to the senior watch officer. The call after that went somewhere higher. By 0200, the information was moving upward through the command structure with the quiet urgency of something that could not wait for morning, traveling through the ranks the way a current moves through a wire, invisible from the outside, but absolute. By 0213, it reached a desk where a single light was still on. The man sitting behind it read the briefing once, set it down flat, and reached for his phone. Rear Admiral Calvin Mercer had not earned the name Stone because of his build, though that was part of it. He had earned it because of the quality of his stillness under pressure, the way catastrophic information seemed to land on him and simply stay there, absorbed without visible disturbance, processed into action without the intervening theater of alarm. His aide woke him at 0230. He read the briefing in 90 seconds, sitting on the edge of his bed in the dark, the paper held at the angle of a man who reads things once and retains them completely. When he finished, he set it down on the nightstand with the care of someone placing something that would be referenced in court. Then he said 4 words. "Get me JAG. Now." He was dressed and on the phone within 4 minutes. By 0300, 2 JAG officers had been pulled from sleep and were already pulling files. By 0340, a pair of NCIS forensic investigators had been contacted and briefed on what to look for and where. By 0415, the logistics of a convoy were being finalized: vehicles, routes, arrival windows, courtroom protocol, federal jurisdictional authority. At 0530, as the Mississippi tree lines were just beginning to separate themselves from the sky, a column of black SUVs rolled south out of a staging point in Alabama. NCIS in the first vehicle, JAG in the second, support personnel in the third, and in the fourth, sitting perfectly upright in full dress whites, gold epaulets, a chest of service ribbons earned across 3 decades, the quiet and total authority of a man who had never once needed volume to be heard, was Rear Admiral Calvin Mercer. He did not dress for the drive. He dressed for the courtroom because he intended to walk through those doors looking precisely like what he was, and what he was the end of Marcus Steele's story. District Attorney Raymond Pruitt took his coffee with 2 sugars and his victories the same way, sweet and assumed in advance. He had printed the press release the previous evening. It was sitting in a manila folder on the passenger seat of his car, already formatted for distribution, already containing the phrase, "Swift Action by Calhoun County Law Enforcement." He just needed the arraignment to go the way arraignments in his county always went, which was to say, the way he had arranged them to go. He and Steele met at the diner on Clement Street at 7:15, 2 hours before the hearing. Steele was already in his dress uniform, hat on the table beside his mug, leaning back in the booth with the posture of a man reviewing a completed project. "Open and shut," Steele said, wrapping both hands around his coffee. Forensics confirmed the substance. 3 priors between them. Wait, no. He corrected himself with a grin. 0 priors. Even better. Judge Voss loves making an example out of first-timers who think they're above the process. Pruitt smiled into his cup. "I want to see their faces when the sentence gets read." "That's the best part," Steele said. "They've been quiet the whole time. Not one word, not one outburst. Think that's going to help them?" He shook his head. "Quiet just means they've already accepted it." Across town, in the buzzing fluorescent stillness of the holding cell, James Scott was on his 47th push-up. Joshua Johnson was on his 53rd. Richard J. Brown counted under his breath, steady and rhythmic, the way men count when the number itself is not the point. When the point is simply to remain in motion, to stay sharp, to keep the body ready for what the mind already knows is coming. They did not talk about the arraignment. They did not talk about Steele. They did not talk at all. They just worked and waited and trusted the machine they had set in motion, the one currently moving toward them at highway speed in a convoy of black SUVs, dressed in white. The arraignment had the relaxed choreography of a proceeding nobody expected to be complicated. Judge Harold Voss had taken the bench at 9:05, radiating the particular impatience of a man with a full docket and no tolerance for delay. Pruitt sat at the prosecution table reviewing notes he didn't need to review. Steele had positioned himself along the side wall where he could watch the defendants' faces when the charges were read aloud. The court-appointed defense attorney, young, underprepared, already apologizing with his posture, shuffled papers at the defense table beside 3 men in orange jumpsuits, who sat with a stillness that continued to unsettle everyone who looked at them directly. The courtroom doors opened at 9:11. The sound they made was not loud. It didn't need to be. The quality of the air in the room changed in the same instant. A pressure shift, subtle and total, the way a room changes when something has entered it that was not there before. Rear Admiral Calvin Mercer walked in first, and the white of his dress uniform hit the fluorescent light of the courtroom like a statement. He moved without haste and without hesitation, for officers flanking him in 2 columns, NCIS on the left, JAG on the right, and took a standing position at the front of the gallery with the settled authority of a man who has never once needed to explain why he belongs in a room. Every head turned. The court reporter stopped typing. Judge Voss looked up from his bench and stayed looking. Pruitt's pen ceased moving. Steele's coffee cup stopped rising, suspended halfway to his mouth, his face cycling through expressions too fast to name. The Admiral did not announce himself. He did not address the court. He turned his eyes to the 3 men in orange jumpsuits at the defense table, to Scott, to Johnson, to Brown, who had straightened incrementally the moment the doors moved, as if something in them had registered the arrival before their eyes confirmed it. Mercer held their gaze for 2 seconds and gave them the smallest nod. Barely a movement, a millimeter of acknowledgement that contained everything. "We're here." Commander Elise Park approached the bench with the unhurried precision of someone who had already won and was now simply completing the paperwork. She placed a 14-page forensic brief on the edge of the judge's bench, straightened it once, and addressed the court in a voice calibrated for clarity rather than drama. "The narcotics recovered from the defendant's vehicle," she explained, "carried a batch identification number. That number was not generic. It was traceable, specifically, to the Calhoun County Sheriff's Department evidence storage facility, where the batch had been logged as part of a prior seizure 18 months ago. Chain of custody records, subpoenaed by NCIS the previous evening, showed the batch had been signed out of the evidence room by one officer for investigative review purposes. It had never been returned. The name on the sign-out log was Marcus Steele. She let that sit for 3 seconds, then continued. A federal communications backup server, a redundancy system local departments were required to maintain but rarely remembered existed, had recovered 17 minutes of body camera footage from the night of the arrest. Footage that had been manually deactivated from the field. Footage that showed, with the timestamp intact, exactly what had happened on the shoulder of Route 7 between the 3rd and 4th pass of the vehicle search. The room came apart. Steele was on his feet before the noise fully crested, his right hand dropping toward his sidearm with the instinct of a man whose only remaining option was forward. 2 federal marshals who had been stationed precisely for this possibility reached him before his hand completed the movement. The restraint was fast, professional, and absolute. The gallery erupted. The judge was on his feet. Pruitt sat completely motionless, the color leaving his face in real time. At the defense table, James Scott, Joshua Johnson, and Richard J. Brown did not move, did not react, did not turn to watch. They sat with their hands clasped, eyes forward, exactly as they had sat at 10 and 2 on the shoulder of Route 7, waiting with the patience of men who had always known this was how it would end. By nightfall, Marcus Steele, District Attorney Raymond Pruitt, and Judge Harold Voss were in federal custody. The arrangement between Voss and Steele's unit, a decade of favorable rulings in exchange for a percentage of civil asset forfeitures that never appeared in any budget report, had been documented in the same NCIS brief that dismantled the narcotics charge. It had taken Commander Park 4 additional minutes to present that section. It had taken federal agents 4 hours to process all 3 men. The DOJ announcement came the following morning. A full audit of Calhoun County's criminal conviction record spanning 12 years. 214 cases flagged for immediate review in the first 48 hours alone. Scott, Johnson, and Brown were formally exonerated before noon on the day of the arraignment. Their records were wiped clean with the administrative finality of something that should never have existed. 3 separate news networks left messages with the Naval Station's Public Affairs Office requesting interviews. All 3 men declined without discussion. 6 months later, a $20 million civil settlement was finalized in federal court. The figure was not negotiated. It was the opening number, and Calhoun County's insurance carrier did not contest it. Every dollar was directed to the 3-8 Legal Defense Initiative, a fund the 3 men established and named for the federal statute most commonly used against the people it was built to protect. Its mandate was simple: provide military-grade legal representation to veterans and civilians wrongfully targeted by corrupt law enforcement, regardless of their ability to pay. They gave no speeches at the signing. They shook no hands for cameras. They drove north on a clear morning in a black Tahoe with Virginia plates, and they talked about the next training cycle and the one after that and the work still waiting for them because the mission was the mission and the team did not leave people behind. It never had. It never would. Share this video with someone who needs to see real karma in action. And subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story about justice, survival, and the moments when the good guys finally win. I'm your channel name, and I'll see you in the next one.